So welcome everyone to the afternoon session, and we have our keynote speaker, Julia. Forgive me, your last name is?
Kordick.
Kordick. Okay.
Kordick.
Welcome, and we're happy to have you here. Please go ahead.
Thank you so much for having me. Because I noticed I did not write my name down in Zoom, I just opened my LinkedIn very quick for you so that you know who I actually am. So my name is Julia, and I work for Microsoft as a so-called global black belt. What this actually means is that I'm very good at a certain thing, and this certain thing, in my case, is developer productivity. So I talk to large organizations and help them figure out how to actually enhance their developer experience in the expectation that happy developers are actually productive developers. Obviously, what's quite a hot topic in this whole space of developer productivity is AI-assisted coding. And as you probably know, we are very opinionated when it comes to AI-assisted coding. We own GitHub and obviously also GitHub Copilot. And today I want to show you how you can maybe, hopefully, actually use GitHub Copilot in this HDF5 context. Just a quick note. Before I got the note that I can maybe do this keynote for you, I never heard of HDF5 in my life before. So obviously, what I was naturally doing, I tried to figure out what HDF5 is, right? So Elena tried to explain it to me briefly, but as I'm a software developer and not really coming from a data scientist background, this was quite new for me. But obviously, I already was very aware of Python. Python has like a broad audience in the data science and scientific community. So the first thing I did naturally was that I was going on GitHub, right? Looking what HDF5 is actually, what the repository looks like. But I don't know about you. So every time that I am looking into a repository that I am not familiar with, and additionally to a topic where I am not familiar with, it gets quite overwhelming very, very fast. So the first thing I naturally did, I forked this repository. And the second thing I did is, and I want to show you this trick because sometimes when we are working with Python libraries or like just different kind of versions of a certain programming language, could be Python, could be C++, could be Java. Just thinking a little bit outside the box, it really helps me personally creating what we call a code space, which is a virtualized environment where I have like a contained environment where I can manage dependencies on a very scoped scale, so that I don't destroy my setup on my local machine. Just to give you this tip, so when you have ever struggled also with Python versions on your machine, just with work, a code space could actually help you. Maybe also a dev container, really depends. But diving a little bit in, I created this code space and now I have like a code space, but I'm still not smarter about what HDF5 actually is, right? But luckily, I have an AI assistant that can probably help me understanding what is going on here. So when I'm now in, this is VS Code, right? So it's a virtualized VS Code, and as you can see, it's actually running in my browser. For demo purposes, this will be fine. Usually when we are working with code, whatever this kind of code is, we usually would use an IDE, and I will do this in a minute, but just for demonstration purposes, we will stay in the browser for now. So I just opened Copilot. And what I want now to do is to help me understand what is actually going on in this repository. And I'm actually doing this with every repository that is not mine or was mine a few months ago. And then I completely forget about it for 6 months and I have no idea what's actually going on. So what I can now do is ask Kordick, can you explain me this project? Just very briefly, before I explain anything about Copilot, show you a little bit what Copilot is actually able to do. As you can see, it started working, and it tells me it's working in what we call in Visual Studio Code the workspace. The workspace contains basically everything, every single file that I have opened in my VS Code at this certain amount of time. And it used 121 references. If you're really interested what it actually used, you can actually look it up. So yeah, full transparency all the time. And now explain to me, hey, this is the open source code for the HDF5 library, what it is for, what are its core features, what are the languages that are important here, how are you actually using it, and if you want to go further, there's like a comprehensive documentation that you can dive into. And as you can see, I can directly jump into the documentation from the explanation here. So what I just did is I used GitHub Copilot in a way that we are all very familiar with like the beginning of end of 2022, when this whole ChatGPT experience appeared, right? So when it's like this typical, I ask a question and AI answers me, I can iterate through the question, make it more brief, try to find out what I actually want to do. And this is what Copilot is actually doing here, but in an integrated context. So usually when we are using a tool like ChatGPT, we are just pushing in a question, what we call is like prompt engineering in the best case, right? And hoping for the best for an answer. What is strong about Copilot in this context is that it's actually using context, right? As you saw here, it used references from the project that have opened. I haven't done anything to this project yet, just to try to get an understanding what the hell is going on here with HDF5, right? And what I used here is the so-called ask mode. As you can see, I hope it's big enough. I make it a little bit bigger that you can also see it on this big screen in the room. What I used here is the so-called ask mode. And when I use this dropdown, you see here that we have actually different ways of interacting with GitHub Copilot, with our code base, with our documentation. We will jump a little bit, we will jump in it as soon as possible. And the second thing that you might notice here, that there is a certain model picked. And when I'm opening this impressive pop-up, you see that there are actually many models available. So it might be whenever you're working with HDF5, with Python, with some other language, that different models might create different results, right? Just to be mindful when you're actually using an AI tooling, that it's not only about the AI tooling, the way it is integrated, but it's also a little bit on how is the mode, how are we actually interacting with this model, and different ways of interacting I will explain in a few minutes, and which model might be the best one. It's basically the most basic thing to understand is that there are basic like completion models or chat models, how we are already very used to it, and there are so-called reasoning models. The 3.7 Sonnet thinking here is such a reasoning model, and it basically says that the model has capabilities of reasoning with itself out of the box, which for usually we would use what we call an agent, right? So this was basically my first step, how to get into HDF5. I asked it some questions. Hey, what is it used for? Why is it useful? Why is it like widely used in the open source and scientific community? A lot of questions just to get an overview. What I actually talk about today to you guys, because you are obviously the expert and I am just the Microsoft showing you a tool, right? Jumping into an actual IDE. Very good, because I see the screen through the camera, so I can see if you can actually see what I see. Very practical. Talking a little bit, so this is Visual Studio Code Insiders in that case. It's just the IDE that I am most familiar with. And I prepared obviously something here for you just to give a basic understanding. So when I am in a file, it is like a basic Python file. I'm using Python because I'm also most used to it. I never was a big C developer in my career. I actually want GitHub Copilot to help me getting away with what we call boilerplate code, right? Because a lot of times when we are handling data just with Python or any other programming language, the steps we usually do, they are very similar. And when there is like a similarity or a kind of a pattern in it, and we already know by now, it's 2025, that AI can pick up these patterns very, very nicely, especially when they are in kind of a repeating sense. So what I already did here is I created a basic Python file. I created some kind of base prompting at the very top. As you can see, I wrote a comment what I actually want to do in this file, just to give GitHub Copilot a little more context what I actually want to achieve here. I already imported some libraries just to make sure that we really pick up really pick it up it really picks up what I actually want to do, right? What I now want to do is, as you maybe already saw when I press enter here, it already gives me like the head of a kind of a function. And what it now does is when I press enter again, it is a little bit more than like just a single file. Hey, is that it actually gives me like a whole function that I can just use if I just want to do like create a simple HDF5 basic data set, right? So when I now press tab, it auto-completes it for me, and it generated me, what was it, like 25 lines of code just out of the blue. Obviously, this is like a very simplified example. I'm pretty aware that you're usually not working with like creating simple data sets to show a demo on like a Keynote, right? But just to demonstrate to you how easy it is to get started, especially when you're starting like from a green field, how we call it in software development, right? Just to get some data rolling here, right? So the creating is the one thing, but what we usually do when we are working like with data is that we want to read data, right? And obviously I can nearly do the same. I give it like, it gave it now the head of the method itself, because I obviously played around with it a little bit before, and it already has some kind of cached in the context what I'm actually wanting to do, but it also works very well. I tried it. You need to trust me on that for now. When you're not giving it any more context than it just had. So the second method that I want here now to autocomplete is like the read the simple data set. And what I now also want to do is, because it kind of referenced here, kind of a print structure method, that I also want to have that, right? Giving like this print structure, giving me like a print. And when we are in Python, we obviously also need like a main function. Now it's doing funny AI stuff. Going a little bit back. Beautiful example is it doesn't really, so AI can basically do everything for you, but as long as you are not aware what AI is doing, it will just generate stupid, repetitive shit. Oh, we're recording, right? I'm sorry. All right. Just keep it for now, just to demonstrate you. So this is like the most basic way of interacting with GitHub Copilot, that I am in a file, I'm pressing enter, I gave it some context beforehand, what I actually want to do. And then I basically let it do the magic, but while I'm aware what it's actually doing, and that what it generates might be wrong, what we just saw here in the bottom. But we will try to reason a little bit on that, what we're actually doing here, right? So when I now open the magic chat window again, let's dive a little bit into what are the different kind of modes I can interact with GitHub Copilot. What you just saw is like the completion mode. So we already know this since 2021, when GitHub Copilot went into beta, that this is kind of an easy way how to interact with that. Just for the demonstration purposes, I now copy and paste the main function inside of here. And we will fix the other things later, right? So when we're talking about in the whole AI context, what we are used to is this simple chat interaction. I mentioned that already. So what is actually happening here? I am basically prompting or asking something, and it goes via an API call to an LLM that is hosted somewhere usually, and then it immediately gives me some answers back. This is like the most simplest way of interacting with an AI. What is new now in the whole space of AI is what we call agents. So, and what is an agent? An agent is basically an LLM embedded in code. So what we can do is we can not only ask it to answer us questions and iterate with that LLM over questions, we can also ask it, if we give it the tools either programmatically, or we use it using like a software as a product, like GitHub Copilot here, it can also do execution for us. So when I ask here about this file, I know I fixed the file already. Well, let's do it like that. Can you give me an example how to add explore function here. Because when I have data, I obviously want to kind of explore and work with that kind of data, right? And what it now says here in ask mode, that I should provide it the hell more information what I actually want to do, which is kind of smart. All right. Explore a data set. Set created. So what it's now doing is it's taking context actually again. My prompt could have been a little bit better. And what it now does here in ask mode, it basically gives me hints what to actually do very slowly today. I didn't pray to the gods of live demos today, probably, I guess. And then it basically does nothing more. It let reason a little bit more, but it basically told me, hey, this could be a code snippet that you could use. This could be like an approach that you could try. This is basically something that you could do, but I'm not doing this for you because in this situation, I am just a co-pilot. I am here to answering your questions. When I now want to have it like a little bit more with, let's say, depth, that it actually also does something. I don't know what's going on here today. Let's cancel it for now. And going into what I just explained, the agent mode, also opening like a new chat window because something went wrong here. And just ask it, hey, I have a file here prepared. It's the cold start visualization file. And how often does it actually happen that, especially when we are using Python, that something with like the paths is wrong, or that there are some basic programming problems that we actually have that we are not really want to solve, right? Because what we actually want to do is to work with the data. This is what we are here for. And now in our role as data scientists. So I now have this visualization file, and it's located in my python.backup. So I go into python.backup. And what I now want to do here is I want to run this visualization file. And as you can see, it throws me an error because something is wrong. And it also tells me what is wrong. But let's imagine that I'm maybe not very familiar with how to solve these problems in Python. And here, Copilot can maybe help you as well. I can ask it, can you help me fix my error, fix the error in the terminal? And now, just for the reference, it tells me, hey, what it's actually got to do. And now it says like, hey, all right, I got it. You told me the error that I should look at is in the terminal. So it tells me, hey, I look up in the terminal command, and it picks up the error message that I actually have. So it then says, hey, look, I cannot find this module, although it's there because we are already in the Python underscore backup like folder. So what we can just do is fix that. And in this case, other than in the ask mode that went wrong in some kind of a weird way, it actually applied these changes already without further ado because it has to beforehand to fix this for me, right? So it made the changes for me. It fixes the path here. And then what it tells me, hey, do you want to try it again, right? And when I now press continue here, it showed me even the terminal commands that I can use is that it's like, yeah, all right. It's executing that. And it basically told me a little like performance analysis for the data, what is actually the data, and showed me the output of my function that I have just done here. And what I can now just do is either decide, all right, this solved my problem, right? And I can keep it, or just in case it totally got the wrong way, which we need to be aware of, right? It's still just a co-pilot, and we are the pilot in the driver's seats. I can make it undo and try to either reason with it again, what actually helped to, what would actually need to be done to fix an error like that. This was like a very simple error, so it was pretty straightforward what to actually do. Or if I want to maybe just try it by myself, because I'm a seasoned Python developer in the end, because I work with it for several years. And I know how to fix basically this call structure that I can call this kind of function that is located in my basic operations.python. So far, so good. What is also kind of helpful is when I'm looking at already written files, and I'm maybe not really sure what is happening here. Opening like a new chat window again, just to have like a clean slate, and we can close the terminal for now. I can also ask like very specifically, can you explain me the operations done in this file? So just in case I'm not pretty aware what the code is about, it may be that the code is just old, or someone did not really took good care in some kind of clean code pattern. I don't see any reference file in your prompt. Oh, because I haven't really actually opened it. That is kind of true. Sorry, Copilot. So let's try again, because it actually takes as context. That's maybe also important to know everything that I have just opened. Actually, today is not a good day for demos, as I see. All right, Copilot. What I now do here, what I usually do not need to do, is I go into the advanced operations python.backup, give it this very actively as a context, and try again. Please explain. Aha. Just a third try. So what could possibly go wrong? And now it's actually going into that file, explaining me what's going on here, that it creates like a large random data array that it actually wants to use, that it then tells me about the different functions that are described here, and just to give me like a brief overview for everything that is going on in that file. So again, if I'm not really aware of what is going on and how to actually work with it, it can also help me with that. In general, what is important to understand is, I thought that already, it's like a Copilot, and you still need to have like a basic understanding what to actually work with that. But I think it's like a very good start if you want to get actually used to this AI assisted coding. So we now saw three basic things, right? So we are on like a project that already exists, and we want to explore this kind of project, what is actually going on, and how I can understand what is going on in that project. We saw how to actually use an ask mode, so the typical ChatGPT back and forth interaction. We saw also an agent mode where AI was also able to do certain things for ourselves to, in this case, help us fix a bug. It can help us with boilerplate code. We saw this in the completion mode at the very beginning, how it basically helped me to create like a create data function and also like a read data function, where the read data function is usually the one that you're using even more. I could also now basically ask a different kind of analysis function of information that I want to get out of that data. I just would have need to be like more precise in my prompting of the function that I actually want to use. It could also help with some kind of documentation. So in the examples that you saw here, actually, I predefined a documentation because I wanted to showcase you what is actually going on in these files when we are generating these files. But obviously, it could also done vice versa, right? So when I'm already in a project and I want to basically leave some bits and pieces, maybe for my colleagues, what I have done in this file, what were my thoughts when I created this analyzing of a certain structure, or when I added some metadata and stuff like that, I could also ask Copilot to generate it afterwards. And I explained to you basically what is going on with like the asked, the edit mode we now skipped, but basically it's like the middle ground between the asked and the agent mode. And this is basically what I wanted to show you in this whole space of AI. Is this what I just showed you HDF5 specific? Obviously it's not, right? So I just use here, because you are the HDF5 community, I use this as an example, but obviously these are basic techniques that you can basically use for every kind of programming operation or programming language that you're maybe working or not working with. And yeah, and I hoped up to this point it helped. And I tried to save some time, talking a lot, obviously, but trying to save some time that you can maybe ask some questions if you have some.
Julia, thank you very much. A very interesting presentation. I'll open the floor to questions. I have a question to get started.
Yes.
So the people in this room actually, I guess, would be more familiar than the average developer with HDF5. And as kind of members of this HDF5 community who are creating the library and these tools, are there things that we can do that make people using Copilot to work with HDF5 be more effective in terms of structuring READMEs or the code or examples? Are there things that we should be doing or not doing that can help in that regard?
So I think what is like a good rule of thumb is that we need to make information obvious. So when we want to work, so structuring my sentence a little bit better. So if we want to have Copilot working effectively with the data that we provide for it, for the HDF5 community, there's basically like a rule of thumb. This is like basic documentation in Markdown for every library, for every framework piece that you actually create, because this is like the most easiest way to digest for Copilot if you want to actively work with that. This could be like a separate file. So usually what we do when we're creating like libraries and stuff like that, what large organizations now start to do is they write two kinds of documentations. The one who is actually for the user, which is like full of like maybe quotation marks, filling words just to make it easier understandable for an actual human user to work with this kind of data structures and stuff like that, or libraries or APIs or whatever you're actually providing. And the other is that they are trying to create out of this documentation like a narrowed down version of Copilot to actually work with. And when we are, this is basically it. So, and the question is, how do we get these information then into Copilot? Because obviously we cannot throw all the time all the information about an API and library into Copilot, because in LLMs we have a certain kind of token limit that we need to be aware of. And the idea behind it is, I did not show it because it's kind of like a niche feature of Copilot, is what we call Copilot extensions. So when I open this here, you see you can chat with a so-called extension. So what an idea could be is, when you are as a community, maybe you want to create like a comprehensive documentation or like library how to actually work with the most common patterns of HDF5, is to maybe have a look in these kind of extensions, because you can actually write extensions by yourself. As you can see, other large organizations and also communities do this as well. So there is the Stack Overflow extension, and also like a Docker extension, obviously also a GitHub extension. And the idea behind this is that you provide access for these extensions to certain kinds of APIs, third-party APIs, documentation, maybe also documentation that's stored in Markdown, but it could also be like a Jira or stuff like that, wherever you are storing, or ominous wikis that are hanging around, right? You can link it to this kind of extension to just ensure every time a person is using or working with HDF5, that it can actually leverage all the information that might be available and relevant for this kind of, with this kind of extension, or the data is actually stored on GitHub, because the large language models and the agents have basic access to public libraries that are, or public repositories in general that are on GitHub, right? So the more information you actually give to GitHub or via directly or via a GitHub Copilot extension, the more likely it is that the results that GitHub Copilot is actually generating is more useful for your specific community.
Okay, thank you very much. Scott?
So earlier you showed where it was pulling from references that it cited. Is it able to do that with source code that it pulled from, where it's referencing that from? Because if you're concerned about like different licenses, right, that you want to now license this code, you kind of have to know if it pulled from other code that might have been have a different license. How do you handle that type of situation?
This type of situation is usually handled in what we call it like an enterprise feature, right? So especially when we are in large organizations, we need to be very aware where the code we are actually using is coming from, right? Because as you said, it might have some certain kind of open source implications. And what you can do is on that enterprise or organizational level, this is not really GitHub Copilot, it's more of configuration of GitHub Copilot on a larger scale, is that you can actually set that code that is like provided to you by GitHub Copilot that has like a certain length or a certain similarity to a very common open source library, that it's either not displayed to you so that you do not come into the problem that you might copy code that you are not allowed, quotation marks, or you don't want to copy in that moment, or you can actually look at the sources where the code that has been generated is coming from. And when it shows the sources where the code has actually been coming from, it also shows what is the open source library, or maybe not open source library, that lies behind that you can always be aware. So 2 routes. Looking at where it's coming from, seeing the library and deciding by yourself, or managing on an organization level that this code is not suggested for you by GitHub itself.
Okay. Other questions? So I have one more question. So it's a very good demonstration, but I'm still kind of confused. You know, it seems the capabilities of Copilot are somewhere between code completion and a summer intern. And I'm not aware, like, what are the limitations as far as tasks like of Copilot? You know, like, let's say at advanced level, currently we're working on adding multi-threading capability to the HDF5 library. That would involve massive changes to the code, dependent modules, test cases, all that stuff. That, I assume, is beyond what Copilot could do now, but is that coming? And if so, when?
I think there are 2 sides to the answer. So is it coming? The short answer is probably yes. Is it coming soon? I'm not aware what soon here is. I think when we are working with AI in general, and also on more complex problems, we also need to be very aware what our expectation is, right? Working with it. So when I'm now throwing in, let's say 1,000 files, and like 10,000 data sets, and expect it to actually fix it all by itself, this will probably not the truth. But if I maybe want to have, so when I'm doing like massive changes, or like a version like bump or something like that, and these are like very like kind of repetitive tasks that may be not complex, but they may take a long of time. These are like operations that are very, very good for Copilot to actually do. So when it just needs to touch basically 500 files to just basically change and import, what we as humans usually do not really want to do, this is something that is like really great. But as you already like noticed, when it comes to really like complex tasks, and multi-threading or parallelization and threading is probably one of them, it starts to struggle really, really fast. So what are basic techniques to actually narrow that down? So when we're pushing all in by one shot and hope for the best, this will probably not really help, right? So what we would as humans do is we would divide and conquer, right? We would think as if we are not working with Copilot, when we would be doing it actually by ourselves. So we would break down the task for Copilot in smaller chunks that it can actually use its basic capabilities and its reasoning capabilities, but we do not overload the token window or the context we are actually providing, and breaking it down for it into smaller chunks so that it can basically start with one module. Then when you got reasoned with Copilot a certain amount of time, it actually got together with Copilot to an result that you are actually like, right? That meets your expectation and quality. And what it actually wants to do is that you can use the knowledge that you've gained over prompting with Copilot or providing the context with Copilot to actually tackle other modules. But as you already mentioned, will it come soon? So what we are using currently here is, I showed you that, is an agent. And we are using currently in Copilot only one agent. But what we are already doing also in the larger Microsoft context is that we are trying to get this kind of orchestration that I just described, like a divide and conquer, that we are breaking down a large task, a complex task into smaller chunks that is digestible for an AI tooling like Copilot, that we actually want to do this also with an AI. So think about like a multi-agent architecture where we have an agent doing this kind of orchestration part for us, and maybe having not only one agent, but maybe 3 or 4 agents doing like very specific personas with very specific personas and a very specific described way of working that are actually working together to solving the more complex tasks. So this is currently in a very much experimental state. I'm doing experiments with customers on that on my own, especially for application modernization. But when the question here is, when will it be ready as a product for basically everyone to use? So my educated guess is in the speed that we are using in the space of AI, and the speed is very, very, very fast, right? Would be 6 to 12 months.
That would be shocking, but we'll see
We'll see.
what the future holds. Okay, awesome. Julia, thank you so much for your time. It was a very interesting presentation.
Thank you for having me. I hope it gave you some ideas how to maybe use GitHub Copilot in the context of HDF5, and I hope you have like a wonderful day full of cool talks.
Thank you again.
Thank you. Take care.